Well, my documentary, The Heart of Sharkness, has been causing quite a stir among Australian ocean lovers lately. I've been contacted by countless people on various social media platforms thanking me for finally reporting on the tragic toll of Australia's out of control shark problem, which now stands at least 58 fatalities in the 25 years since great whites were protected in Australia, and for putting the case forward that we need to shift our focus back on protecting people, not sharks. What I didn't elaborate on was how we might achieve this politically. Soon I will be speaking to Mark Banasiak, who is a member of the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party in the upper house of the New South Wales Parliament. Before I speak to him, though, let me just list some of the sightings of sharks at beaches in Australia in the 3 weeks since I released The Heart of Sharkness. In Perth, there's been 6 sightings of great whites of various lengths, including a 5-metre great white just 30 metres from the sand at Swanbourne Beach, which is just north of Cottesloe. A 5-metre shark was spotted 25 metres from shore at Meelup in the southwest, near the beautiful holiday town of Dunsborough. On October 29, 2 surfers enjoying the waves at Kawarramut Bay were advised to get out of the water because a shark of unknown size was lurking nearby. And last week, up to a dozen juvenile sharks were filmed in a feeding frenzy right near the sand at Snapper Rocks in Queensland on the Gold Coast, one of Australia's most popular surf breaks, and where a world title surfing contest is due to be held in May next year. There were more, of course. Shark sightings and close encounters are so common these days that not all of them are reported. So-called shark experts will tell you that this is perfectly normal and there's nothing to worry about because sharks are not interested in attacking people, even though they continue to do so. This situation is both absurd and untenable. But what can we do? Well, a month ago, Mark Banasiak of the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party stood up in the upper house of the New South Wales Parliament and in a few short minutes made more sense than almost any politician has made on this topic anywhere in Australia in 25 years. He said the government needs to implement a sensible strategy to maximise safety while maintaining conservation safeguards. Well, that makes sense. He noted, as I did in The Heart of Sharkness, that the blanket protection of great whites was implemented 25 years ago without any knowledge of the species' baseline population. He said drones, smart drum lines, and other non-lethal protection methods, which the state government is prioritising in order to appease environmentalists, are not on their own sufficient to maintain safety. He said a tightly controlled shark fishery is possible and a 3-year controlled operation should start as soon as possible. And finally, he said that the government should commission a proper population assessment of great whites. Well, I've got Mark on the line here and I'm really excited to talk to him about it because, like I said, he's a very rare politician talking immense sense on this topic. Mark, great to talk to you, mate.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
First, what's your opinion, taking a step back, what's your opinion of how we got here? How did Australia become a country that seems to want to protect sharks even at the cost of human lives?
I think we've put emotion over science and facts. That's been a common theme in, I guess, wildlife management for many decades in Australia, and it's this, I guess, false dichotomy where you think that we live in a pristine wilderness that's been untouched by human hands, when the reality is we've been managing wilderness and managing wildlife for eons, and to think that we're just going to flip a switch and go hands off and it'll all balance itself out, while we're still supposed to interact with wildlife and natural environments, and nothing's going to go wrong. It's just absurd.
I think sharks have become a kind of a symbol of nature to a lot of people because they're so powerful. Quite often, you hear them referred to as majestic and awesome and beautiful and graceful and all these things that words that we used to use to describe God or divinity. And now sharks are just this kind of sacred creature that people worship. Am I wrong or right?
No, I think you've described it quite well. There's a famous author, wildlife author, Graham Webb, who describes this notion of the charismatic animal. And certain species get labelled as charismatic animals, and they become untouchable in terms of any sensible discussion around manage them as a population. So I think you hit the nail on the head, Fred.
Your first proposal is, let's get the balance right. Let's protect humans while remaining rational and reasonable about maintaining, conservation practices. What's your opinion about how do voters feel about that, and what's the reaction been like in Macquarie Street at Parliament House?
Well, there was a lot of scoffing from the Greens, of course, because they have an alternative view of reality. But largely, there hasn't been much commentary in the parliamentary world about it. I've obviously got a lot of good feedback from people that use the water. So obviously, I'm in reasonably good communication with spear fishermen, commercial fishermen, rec fishermen, and they've been talking to me about this issue for quite a while now. So their reception has been quite positive. They've sort of said, it's common sense, Mark, and that's probably why it's not going to happen. So, but look, we'll still certainly try because I think something does need to change in this space.
Are you speaking to many fishermen?
Yeah, look, at quite a lot. I deal with them quite regularly, and for quite a few years now, they've been talking about, I guess, the predation that's been happening on their catch, both at a recreational level and a commercial level. And I know there's been some recent, I guess, seminars with commercial and rec fishermen over this predation issue with sharks held by the department. And they've tried to focus more on the predation of fish rather than predation of humans, the department has. But interestingly, some of the commentary that's come from commercial and rec fishermen and also scientists overseas that they don't rate our smart drum lines as any tagging system as credible science because how it's conducted. So
can you elaborate on that? So this is fishermen are saying that the smart drumline system in New South Wales is ineffective. Just before you answer that question, I'll just quickly describe how the system works. It's drum lines are hooks with a bit of meat or fish stuck to them. When a shark gets caught on the hook, it sends an alarm. A rescue team, I use that word with all due emphasis. A rescue team rushes out and rescues the shark, tags it, and lets it go. And that tag is meant to be able to warn us whenever that particular shark approaches a popular beach. So what's the opinion of that system among fishermen that you're receiving?
Yeah, well, look, they refer to them as dumb drum lines. I think there's a couple of problems with the system. Is the bait that they're using? They bait it with mullet, which obviously is cheap. So I understand why they're doing it for that. But mullet isn't necessarily the right bait for larger sharks. Anything over a certain size, I think 3.5 meters, those sort of sharks start to, I guess, prey shift and shift their appetite towards larger mammals, so seals, whales, etc. So it's probably not capturing, I guess, the number of sharks, larger sharks that are really really out there. So I think it's giving people a false sense of security about how many are out there of a certain size. I think first and foremost, that's one of the big problems with it. I've heard stories of seals actually learning how to pickpocket the baits and get a free feed as well, which is an interesting one.
Yeah.
That's a bit anecdotal. I think the big problem is actually the baiting system. They're using the wrong type of bait, and then, as you said, when the rescue team comes out, they tag the shark and then they push it 500 meters off the drum line and let it go. And it's sort of like I should be right attitude.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess the pinging system in terms of when you see a shark coming into an area, it's limited by the number of, I guess, arrays that are in the water that pick up these tagged sharks. So I think the shark's got to get within 500 meters of one of these, I guess, these array systems to pick them up. So
Well, they say 500 meters, but I suspect that's overstating it. I reckon it's probably closer.
I think with any sort of radar or radio transmission, it's line of sight has a big part to play in it. So there's some limitations to this system, and as I said, I think it's giving people a false sense of security that these smart drum lines are going to keep them safe.
I think the department that is responsible for managing this and for managing our safety in the water is the Department of Primary Industries. I think it's been thoroughly captured by the type of person that I refer to as shark huggers, but they would refer to themselves as conservationists and with a speciality in affection for sharks. How deeply embedded is this affection for sharks in the DPI, and what do we need to do to change the culture in that department?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I don't know how deeply embedded it is, but it certainly is embedded in the department, also in the department environment, which has concurrence over any decisions that are made by the Department of Primary Industries. So concurrence for your listeners and your viewers is essentially that I guess a co-signatory or a co-agreement that occurs between departments on legislation or decisions, and pretty much every act that has something to do with primary industries and fishing and that has to have concurrence with the environment. So the environment department is certainly ideologically captured on, I guess, the majesticness and the charismatic notion of sharks, and really ignoring, really ignoring good scientific principles that conservation just doesn't mean you let populations grow to an unworldly or unwieldy number. There's a carrying capacity in any environment for all different species. That's just basic science. If you let a population grow to a certain to unwieldy amount, then it's going to have an impact on the diversity of other and success of other creatures in that environment. So there is a carrying capacity. There is an optimal, sustainable population. For every animal.
So, Mark, what is the likelihood of us seeing a revived and tightly controlled, as you said, in Parliament, shark fishery in New South Wales? We need it desperately, clearly. What are the odds of that happening?
It's going to be really, really difficult, because not only do I need to convince the state government to do it, they're going to need to convince the federal government to give us permission to do it, because we also need federal concurrence because of the legislation that exists federally. So we would need to amend certain aspects of the Fisheries Management Act, particularly around Section 220, which deals with threatened species. And then we would also need to get, I guess, like an exemption from the Federal Environmental Act that talks about threatened species as well. So it's not impossible, but it's certainly going to be a challenge. And with
Well, Mark, there's a really quite um, disturbing moment in my documentary towards the end of it when I ask um, Jeff Schmucker, who's both a fisherman and a surfer in Streaky Bay in South Australia. I said, if the government doesn't do anything, what'll happen next? And he says, there'll be another attack, then there'll be another attack, and pretty soon there'll be no one surfing in South Australia. Now, just as an aside, South Australia has some of the best surf in the entire world, but people are leaving South Australia because it's too dangerous to surf down there these days. That same that same prospect will apply in New South Wales fairly soon. So you're saying it's extremely difficult to get the state government and the federal government, both of them Labor and beholden to a certain extent to environmental ideas. It's going to be hard to get both of those coordinated to lift protection and get a shark fishery up in New South Wales. I despair for this country, Mark. Like what? How can we?
I do too. I asked myself the question: how many deaths is it going to take before this view shifts, this ideological view shifts? Like, I saw your documentary. I saw how many people were saying, "Just leave them alone." You know, you know, you're going into their environment, etc., etc. Essentially, almost victim shaming. You deserve what you get. Um, how many deaths are going to be acceptable? Because if we just allow a population to grow unchecked, of a species that does have a propensity to attack, how many deaths are acceptable? Is it 20 a year? Is it 30 a year? Like the number of
Well, it's an incremental thing, isn't it? I mean, if you'd said 20 years ago, 5 people a year are going to be dying from shark attacks, people would be saying, "Oh, we can't accept that." But it goes up incrementally, and people get accustomed to it. It's now the new normal, isn't it?
Yeah, look, sadly, it has become the new normal, and it's almost in some people's mind become a cost of doing business or a cost of going out into the water that there is that risk, and you take that risk, but as it still comes back, at what number of deaths is acceptable to
Yeah.
the public and to the government.
So in the documentary, I explain, and people will have to watch the documentary to get this because there's a bit of detail involved. But I do explain why nets work. These are nets that don't enclose a beach; they just act like a trap for any shark, any large fish that swims through them. And the key debate in New South Wales, where you and I are, is whether or not to keep the nets in the water. Now, they're put in every summer. Last summer, they were pulled out a month early to appease environmentalists. And this summer, they were put in just about a month ago. This summer, it was proposed that at certain beaches, some beaches, there wouldn't be nets at all. And then, lo and behold, Mercury Salakis, a father, husband, surfer, loyal member of the community, was killed at a popular surf beach in Sydney. And the Tara Moriarty, the Minister for Primary Industries, was forced to abandon her plan to not put nets at certain beaches. The key debate now is whether or not we can have more nets by next summer. There will, despite the death of Mercury Salakis and probably one or two more people this summer, there will still be politicians who advocate next summer, I'm sure, for the nets to be not installed or installed for a shorter period. What's the go there, Mark? What are we up against to see more nets at more beaches in New South Wales?
I think you're up against, I said, ideologically captured people that like animal rights groups and green groups that just I just live in a fairyland that think that we don't interact with wildlife and you know live in Disneyland basically.
Yeah.
So it's not reality. So yeah, you're up against some fairly strong ideology um, around.
What's it like for you, Mark? What's it like for you dealing with these people?
It's like beating my head against a brick wall.
Oh,
I'm a realist. I grew up fishing. I grew up on the water. Yes, I took up hunting later in life, but the principles are the same. You're out there in the environment. We've been interacting with the environment for eons and eons. It's not a case that we can just, you know, leave things to go unmanaged in our environment. That's that's just the
exactly.
reality. It's just the reality. So,
Exactly. It's our responsibility to manage the environment, not to let it go, just, assume that it's in balance and will remain so if we don't somehow manage it.
yeah, yeah, and so we have to manage our marine environment. So we need to work out what is that optimal sustainable population of the different species of sharks. I think that's first and foremost one of the first things we need to work out, because at the moment the narrative coming out of the departments is about recovery. We need to recover the species. Well, how do you know when you've recovered if you haven't worked out what the optimal sustainable population is? Um,
It's suspicious, isn't it, that the CSIRO in particular, it seems incredibly reluctant or procrastinating would be the polite way of putting it, in getting out an estimation of the population trend. It's been 25 years now. 8 years ago, one of the senior scientists at the CSIRO told a Senate inquiry that there would be an estimation of the trend soon. It still hasn't been produced. I think that's because they know, Mark, that if they did produce a scientific and reliable and independent estimation of the population trend of great white sharks, that they'd be revealing the fact that the numbers are through the roof and all their jobs are over.
yeah, it's what we call in political land a self-licking ice cream. So you keep a problem going, and you keep getting funding to solve a problem that potentially doesn't exist anymore. And as I said, if you go back to 2002 when the decision was made to list them as threatened, we didn't know then what the exact population was either. So if you don't have a baseline, or a starting point, how do you know when your management decisions have made a positive impact or any impact at all? Um, and yeah, how do you know when you reach the optimal sustainable population? Um,
Exactly.
if you don't,
Yeah.
if you don't know, if you haven't done any work to understand what that is, and I think that's
Yeah.
first and
They're
foremost,
in
that's one of
they're
the
in
things
no
we need to
hurry.
do.
Yeah, they're in no hurry to find that out. Righto, Mark. Well, just one last thing. What can surfers, divers, swimmers, beach lovers, even people who aren't who don't go to the beach but think that the toll of this policy is thoroughly unacceptable, what can people do? How do they create a sort of political groundswell for change in this country?
Yeah, well, I think they need to get politically engaged. Need to be writing to their local members, writing to the premier, writing to their federal members, and saying that enough is enough. We need to we need to ask for these certain things. We need to be asking for a proper study in terms of what the sustainable population should be, of the species of sharks. We need to make sure there's greater rigor placed on the tagging program and the so-called smart drum lines. Bait them with proper bait, so you actually get a proper indication of how many large sharks are out there. Tell the politicians you want to keep the nets, and that you want human safety prioritised over sharks, because you know I've seen some of the footage of some of these. Obviously not Mercury, but one of the other shark attacks that happened off Sydney Heads a couple of years ago, and it was pretty horrific to watch. But that wasn't an accidental. That wasn't an accidental bite. Um, that was a prey shift of a shark who didn't want to take, or there wasn't, the type of fish out there that they wanted to eat, and so they prey shifted, and you can see how how that person was attacked. It was deliberate, and it was designed to essentially disable the shark's prey and target. That's what they do. They hit them once and they hit them
Yeah.
again, and then they're
Yep.
gone.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot of so-called experts who will argue that great whites or no sharks have a taste for human flesh, but that particular attack off Little Bay near Maroubra in Sydney of Simon Nellist, I think his name was, deep water swimmer, not far from shore, in fact, was horrifyingly prolonged, and his attack wasn't the only one where it was proved beyond doubt that sharks will attack anything. I mean, I've seen them chew into boat propellers. I mean, they're not discerning animals. So, Mark, I just got to say thank you on behalf of Australia's beach lovers, surfers, swimmers, divers, and even people who believe in Western civilization and the obligation of humans to manage the environment in which they live. Thank you on their behalf for putting our case forward in Parliament, and good luck getting some changes done.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'll keep trying for all those people that you mentioned, and all the people that we've lost because of poor management decisions and putting emotion over science.
Good man. All right. Thanks, Mark.
No worries. Thanks, Fred.